It was supposed to be a routine elk hunt in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. A seasoned guide leading 4 paying clients into the backcountry. But what started with distant knocks in the timber and massive tracks in the snow turned into something none of them were prepared for. Through the thick pines, a towering figure nearly twice the height of a man stepped into the open, dragging the remains of a moose like it weighed nothing. The hunters froze. Their rifles suddenly felt useless. Panic broke out. Radios jammed. Storm clouds closed in. And as the men scrambled to evacuate, the realization hit them. This thing wasn't just watching. It was following. They made it out alive, but barely. And what they left behind raises a terrifying question. Did they stumble into the territory of something ancient, something intelligent, and something that does not want us there? Your time here matters. Choosing stillness in a busy world makes you one of us. Thanks for being here. I've been guiding hunters through Montana's backcountry for 23 years now. And in all that time, I've built my reputation on 2 things. Knowing these mountains like the back of my hand and always putting my clients' safety first. The name's Mike Callahan, and until October of 2012, I would have told you I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at a person. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. When you've spent as much time as I have in the Bitterroot Range, you develop a 6th sense for the rhythm of things. Every season has its own character, its own set of rules. Late October is when the serious hunters come looking for bull elk in their prime. The air gets crisp, the aspen leaves turn golden, and the first dustings of snow start to cap those jagged ridges. Daylight becomes precious, shrinking a little more each day as winter creeps closer. Run a legitimate operation out of Hamilton, Montana. Everything by the book, permits, insurance, the works. Most of my clients are repeat customers who come back year after year because they know I'll put them where they need to be. I'm not one of those guides who guarantees a kill. Nature doesn't work that way. What I do guarantee is that I'll use every bit of knowledge I've gained over 2 decades to give them their best chance at success. That October started like any other. The elk were en route, bugling their challenges across the valleys at dawn and dusk. The weather was holding steady, cold nights, clear days, with just enough snow up high to make tracking easier. Perfect hunting conditions. I had my usual setup. At base camp, wall tents with wood stoves, good equipment, and plenty of supplies. Everything ran like clockwork, just as it had hundreds of times before. I remember checking my logbook that morning, noting the temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit with a light breeze from the northwest. The sunrise painted the mountains in shades of pink and orange, and you could smell winter in the air, that clean, sharp scent that tells you snow is coming, even when there's not a cloud in sight. What I couldn't know then was how different this trip would be. How everything I thought I knew about these mountains, about what was possible and what wasn't, was about to be turned upside down. I've always been a practical man, grounded in reality. I deal in facts, tracking signs, weather patterns, animal behavior. The kind of solid, reliable information that keeps people safe and helps them succeed in their hunts. But what happened over those next few days? Well, it challenged everything I believed about what lives in these mountains. And more importantly, it made me question whether keeping my clients safe meant something entirely different from what I'd always thought. I've kept quiet about this for over 10 years now. Not because I'm afraid people won't believe me. I've built enough credibility that my word means something in these parts. No, I've stayed quiet because I needed to be absolutely certain about what I was going to say. Because once this story gets told, there's no taking it back. The clients pulled up to our meeting point in their rental SUVs just after sunrise. 4 hunters from Wisconsin, all wearing brand new camo and carrying gear that still had price tags dangling. I've learned not to judge too quickly. Sometimes the ones with all the shiny equipment turn out to be decent woodsmen. But my gut told me this group might be different, especially the youngest one. Brad, while the others were checking their packs and discussing the weather, Brad was already talking about how he planned to bag the biggest bull in the Bitterroots. He kept fingering his compound bow like it was some kind of lucky charm, and I noticed he had a small camcorder clipped to his vest. That's when I started my usual safety briefing, explaining how we'd be heading into some serious backcountry, about 8 miles from the nearest road. This isn't like hunting back home, I told them, watching their faces for signs of understanding. The terrain is steep, the weather can turn nasty without warning, and help isn't just a phone call away. The 3 older hunters, Tom, Steve, and Mike, nodded soberly. Brad just grinned and asked if I'd ever seen any Bigfoot tracks up. Here, we loaded our gear onto the pack mules and started the long trek to our camping spot, a sheltered drainage I've used for years. It's perfect for elk hunting, a natural funnel between 2 ridges, with good water and plenty of cover. The aspens were dropping their leaves, creating a golden carpet that would normally crunch under our boots. But something felt off about the sound, or rather, the lack of it. I've walked these trails hundreds of times, and there's usually a constant background chorus. Squirrels chattering, pine siskins flitting through the branches, the occasional woodpecker working a dead tree. But today, the forest seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume. I caught myself stopping more often than usual, cocking my head to listen. By mid-afternoon, we'd reached the camping area and started setting up. The wall tents went up efficiently. At least the older guys knew their way around camp gear. Brad spent more time adjusting his GoPro camera than helping, but I let it slide. Better to save my authority for when it really mattered. As I got the wood stove going in the main tent, I did another mental inventory of our surroundings. The creek was running clear and cold, perfect for keeping meat fresh. The ridgeline above us still held patches of early snow. Everything looked exactly as it had during last year's successful hunts, but that unusual quiet kept nagging at me. "Hey Mike," Tom called from outside. "You see much elk sign on the way in?" I stepped out of the tent, scanning the darkening timber. "There's been activity," I answered truthfully. "But it's different this year. They're not moving in their usual patterns." What I didn't say was that the elk seemed to be avoiding this drainage entirely, something I'd never seen before in all my years of guiding. The first morning of the hunt, I divided our group into pairs, standard practice to cover more ground and keep things manageable. I took Mike, the most experienced of the 4, while Tom and Steve paired up, and Brad went with his uncle. We'd agreed to work different drainages, staying in radio contact, and meeting back at camp by 4 o'clock. Mike and I headed northeast along Cedar Creek, moving slowly in the pre-dawn darkness. The temperature had dropped below freezing overnight, leaving a thin crust of snow on the ground, perfect for tracking. As the sky began to lighten, we could make out elk sign from the previous evening. Broken branches, droppings, and clear hoof prints in the fresh snow. We'd been following the creek for about 2 hours, when I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There, crossing the creek bed where the snow had settled thickest, was a line of prints that didn't make any sense. At first glance, I thought maybe a bear had come through, but these weren't bear tracks. They were footprints, human-shaped, but massive, easily 18 inches long and 8 inches across at the ball of the foot. "What do you make of those?" Mike whispered, crouching down beside me. "I've seen plenty of barefoot human prints in my time, usually in summer, when someone's camp shoes float away during a river crossing. But these were different." The depth of the impression suggested whatever made them was incredibly heavy, and the stride length was well over 4 feet. 5 distinct toes were clearly visible in each print, with dermal ridges preserved in the crystalline snow. "Probably just someone messing around," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe one of those pranksters with the big rubber feet." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. The prints showed natural foot mechanics, the pressure points, the toe spread, the subtle arch support. And they were fresh from early this morning before the sun could soften the snow. Mike nodded. But I could tell he wasn't buying my explanation either. We followed the tracks for about 50 yards before they veered off into a dense stand of lodgepole pines where the ground was too frozen to hold prints. I took several photos with my phone, including one with my hunting knife laid across a print for scale. Then I made a point of marking the location on my GPS. 20 years of guiding in these mountains, and I'd never seen anything like this. Part of me wanted to radio the others, but I decided against it. No sense getting everyone worked up, especially Brad with his Bigfoot comments from yesterday. Let's keep this between us for now, I told Mike. Could be nothing, but no reason to distract from the hunt. He agreed, and we continued up the drainage. But I noticed we both kept scanning the tree line more than usual, and our conversation, already sparse, dropped to whispered essentials only. I tried to keep my voice steady, but even I didn't believe my own dismissal of those tracks. Mike seemed willing to let it go, though, and we pressed on with our hunt. The rest of the day proved frustratingly quiet. No bugles, no fresh elk sign, nothing that would indicate the usual rutting activity we'd expect this time of year. We all reconvened at camp that evening. The mood was tense. The other pairs hadn't fared any better. We sat around the fire as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, warming our hands with tin cups of coffee. I don't get it, Brad said, breaking the silence. This drainage was full of elk last season. Where are the bugles? Hell, where are any animals? Tom nodded in agreement. Even the birds seem scarce. In 20 years of hunting, I've never heard the woods this quiet. He was right. The normal symphony of evening sounds, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the occasional owl, was noticeably absent. The silence felt heavy, unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. Maybe the weather pushed them higher up, Steve suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. That's when we heard it, a sharp, distinct crack that echoed across the valley. It sounded like someone had taken a baseball bat to a tree trunk. Before anyone could comment, a second knock answered from the opposite ridge. Maybe half a mile away, the hunters exchanged glances. Mike let out a nervous laugh. Well, boys, sounds like we're in Sasquatch country now. Very funny, Brad snorted, but I noticed how his eyes darted toward the darkening tree line. I stayed quiet, my mind racing back to conversations I'd had with other guides over the years. Dave Matthews, who'd worked these mountains for 30 years, once told me about hearing similar knocks during a spring bear hunt. Said it made his clients so uncomfortable they packed out early. Jerry Wilson reported the same thing in the Sapphire. Range, wood knocks that couldn't be explained by falling branches or normal forest sounds. At the time, I'd written off their stories as campfire talk. But now, with those massive tracks fresh in my mind and these deliberate knocks echoing through the drainage, I wasn't so sure. The sounds had been too precise, too measured to be natural. Whatever made them was communicating. Probably just some other hunters, I said finally, trying to maintain a professional demeanor. Sound carries far in these valleys. But I knew better. We were the only permitted hunting party in this drainage, and the nearest public access was 15 miles away. As darkness settled over our camp, I found myself straining to hear more knocks, more signs of whatever was out there watching us. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks into the night sky, but the forest remained eerily silent. I took first watch, more out of habit than any admitted concern. The others turned in around 10 o'clock, crawling into their tents with muttered good nights. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and I fed it another log. Watching the flames lick up around the fresh wood dutt, it must have been around midnight when I first heard it, a heavy crushing of underbrush maybe 50 yards behind my tent. My initial thought was elk, but the footfalls were too deliberate, too heavy. Even a bull elk moves with a certain grace. This was different. The sound circled to our left, maintaining that same distance. Whatever it was had to be massive to make that much noise. I gripped my rifle tighter, straining my eyes against the darkness. The moon was barely a sliver, and the forest beyond our firelight was pitch black. A branch snapped, not a twig or small limb, but the sharp crack of something thick being broken. The sound echoed through the drainage like a gunshot. In the vaya. Nearest tent, I heard Brad stir. "You hear that?" He whispered through the nylon. "Yeah," I answered quietly. "Stay put." The movement continued its circle, working around to the other side of camp. Another branch broke, this one even louder. Tom's tent zipper rasped as he poked his head out. "What the hell is that?" he hissed. "Not sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Too heavy for Bear. Mike and Steve were awake now too. I could hear them shifting in their sleeping bags, their breathing quick and shallow. The creature, I couldn't think of what else to call it, completed its circuit of our camp 3 times over the next 2 hours. Each pass was marked by those thunderous footsteps and the occasional snap of wood. None of us slept much. Even when the sounds finally faded around 3 in the morning, we lay awake, listening to the unnatural silence of the forest. The usual night sounds never returned. No owls, no small animals, nothing. As dawn slowly brightened the eastern sky, I could see the toll the sleepless night had taken on everyone. Dark circles ringed bloodshot eyes, and the morning conversation was terse, limited to essential communications. No one wanted to directly address what we'd heard, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Maybe we should move camp," Steve suggested as he poured himself a 3rd cup of coffee. His hands trembled slightly. "Those were some big damn bears," Brad muttered, but his tone suggested he didn't believe his own explanation. Tom just sat silent, staring into the trees where we'd heard the heaviest movement. I noticed he'd moved his rifle closer to his side. I busied myself with breakfast, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. But my mind kept returning to those massive tracks we'd found yesterday, and the wood knocks that had preceded our nocturnal visitor. Something was out there, something that didn't mind letting us know. We were in its territory. The morning sun did little to dispel the unease that had settled over our camp. We all jumped at small sounds, our nerves frayed from the long night of listening to something huge circle our position. Whatever bravado the group had shown yesterday was gone, replaced by a simmering tension that made every shadow seem deeper, every rustle in the brush more ominous. After our restless night, I knew we needed to get the hunters focused on what they came for: elk. The morning was crisp, temperature hovering around 35 degrees, and fresh snow from 2 days ago meant tracking would be good. I led our group deeper into the drainage, following what looked like promising elk sign. "See these tracks here?" I pointed to some partial impressions in the snow, probably from yesterday afternoon. "We're getting closer." Brad, still eager despite his obvious fatigue, pushed ahead while the others hung back more than usual. I couldn't blame them after last night. We'd covered maybe 3/4 of a mile when Steve stopped abruptly, his face pale. "Hey, what?" "Made those?" he asked, pointing to a massive pine. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. About 12 feet up the trunk were deep gouges in the bark, like something had raked enormous claws down the side. The marks were fresh, the exposed wood still light-colored against the dark bark. "Could be a bear," I said automatically, though I knew better. Even the biggest grizzly couldn't reach that high, and the pattern was all wrong. Bears typically leave more random scratching patterns when they mark trees. Tom walked closer to examine the gouges. "Look at this," he said, running his hand along a section of stripped bark near the base. "See how it's twisted off? That's not random damage. Something peeled this deliberately, like unwrapping a candy bar." He was right. The bark had been removed in a spiral pattern, almost methodically. I'd seen plenty of bear-marked trees in my 20 years of guiding, but never anything like this. Maybe it fell against another tree? Brad suggested, but his voice wavered. Even our most enthusiastic client was showing cracks in his bravado. Mike shook his head. There's no other tree here that could have caused this. Whatever did this was standing right here, and it was tall. The silence that followed was heavy. We all knew what Mike was implying, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. The gouges were fresh enough that whatever made them had to be nearby. We should keep moving, Brad said finally. The elk have to be close. He adjusted his bow nervously but started walking ahead. Steve and Mike exchanged worried glances. I don't know about this, Steve muttered. First those tracks, then the knocks, now these marks. We came here to hunt, Brad interrupted. So let's hunt. I studied the tree marks one last time, noting how deep they were, how the wood had been scored by something incredibly powerful. My instincts were screaming that we should turn back, but I had clients to consider. Brad was right about one thing, we were here to hunt. But I was beginning to wonder if we were the ones being hunted. Stay close together, I ordered, shouldering my rifle. No one wanders off alone. I took point, leading us further along the game trail, but my eyes kept scanning the trees instead of looking for elk sign. The next morning dawned gray and cold. I led our group along a new route, hoping to circle back to where we'd seen elk sign 2 days earlier. The terrain grew rougher as we climbed, with granite boulders dotting the slope. That's when Tom called out from behind me. Hold up a second, he said, pointing to a gap between two massive rocks. What's that? I followed his gesture and felt my professional composure slip. Wedged between the boulders was what could only be described as a crude shelter. Logs ranging from wrist thick to nearly as wide as my thigh had been stacked and interwoven in a way that created a rough lean-to structure. Some smaller branches filled the gaps, and there were clear signs of deliberate placement. This wasn't random windfall. That's not natural, Mike said, voicing what we were all thinking. Look at how those logs are crossed. Something built this. I'd seen plenty of debris piles from avalanches and storm damage over the years. This was different. The construction showed purpose, with larger logs forming a basic frame and smaller ones filling the spaces between. What disturbed me most was how fresh it looked, no significant weathering or rot. Could be an old hunter's shelter, I offered, but even I didn't believe it. No hunter would drag logs this size up here, and the Forest Service would never authorize such a structure. Brad, who'd been quiet, suddenly exploded. I paid $4,000 for this hunt. We're not leaving just because someone found some stacked wood. This isn't just stacked wood, Steve countered, his voice tight. After everything else we've seen, those tracks, the sounds at night, those marks on the tree, we need to think about safety here. The argument quickly escalated. Tom and Mike sided with Steve, while Brad grew increasingly agitated about his investment in the trip. I understood both perspectives. My clients had spent serious money and traveled far for this hunt, but my gut was screaming that something was very wrong in these woods. Listen, I finally interrupted. I propose a compromise. We give it one more day. Tomorrow we'll hunt the South Ridge where we saw the freshest elk sign. But we hunt tight together, no splitting up. If we don't have success by sunset tomorrow, we pack out first thing the following morning. Fair. The tension hung thick for several moments before Brad grudgingly nodded. One more day. But I want a full day of actual hunting, not jumping at shadows. The others eventually agreed, though I could see the reluctance in their faces. As we moved away from the structure, I caught Steve taking photos with his phone. Smart. I wished I'd thought to document it myself. We'll break for lunch up ahead, I announced, trying to restore some normalcy to the situation. Then we can plan tomorrow's route. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the ones doing the planning anymore. Something else was orchestrating events in these mountains, and we were just playing our parts. Dawn broke with a thin layer of frost coating our tent flaps. I was already awake, having slept fitfully through another night of distant wood knocks and unexplained movement in the timber. The temperature read 28 degrees Fahrenheit on my small thermometer, and wisps of steam rose from my coffee as I watched the others emerge from their tents. Brad was first out, his earlier bravado somewhat tempered by another restless night. He grabbed his own coffee and wandered to the edge of camp, binoculars already scanning the ridgeline above us. The sun hadn't quite crested the mountains yet, but there was enough light to glass for elk. I heard him before I saw him drop his mug. "Holy shit," he whispered, then louder, "Holy shit." I was at his side in seconds, following his trembling finger toward the ridge about 400 yards away. Through the morning mist, I caught the tail end of something massive moving across the skyline. Even at that distance, the figure was unmistakably bipedal and impossibly large. It took 3 long strides before disappearing behind the ridge's shoulder. "Tell me you saw that," Brad's voice cracked. The cocky client who'd been pushing us forward was gone, replaced by someone who looked like they'd seen a ghost. By now, the others had joined us. Tom immediately started setting up his spotting scope, while Mike kept insisting it was probably just an elk standing weird in the mist. "That wasn't any damn elk," Brad snapped. "I've been hunting 20 years. I know what I saw." His hands were shaking as he tried to pour more coffee. It was walking on 2 legs, had to be 9 feet tall at least. Steve suggested it might have been a shadow or trick of the light. Distance plays funny games with perspective, especially in morning haze, but Brad wouldn't hear it. "I'm not going anywhere alone today, not after that." He turned to me, eyes wide. "You're the guide. You make the call. But I'm telling you right now, whatever that was up there, it wasn't natural." I felt the weight of leadership pressing down on me. My reputation as a guide was built on 20 years of sound judgment. Part of me wanted to dismiss Brad's sighting, stick to the plan, and salvage what was left of this hunt. But I couldn't shake what I glimpsed myself, that massive silhouette moving with deliberate purpose across the ridge. "We hunt as a group today," I said finally. "No exceptions. We'll work that south slope like planned, but we stay within sight of each other at all times." "This is ridiculous," Mike muttered. "We're letting imagination run wild here." "Maybe so," I replied, "but better cautious than careless. I've never seen wildlife act like this before. Until we figure out what's going on, we stick together." Brad nodded vigorously, already checking his bow and quiver with nervous energy. The others began gearing up too, though I noticed they all stayed unusually close to camp. The morning light was filling the valley now, but somehow the forest felt darker than ever. We moved cautiously through the timber, 5 men trying to stay within eyesight of each other while still covering enough ground to spot elk. The morning was dead quiet except for our boots crunching through patches of early snow. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Around 9:30 in the morning, we caught the first hint of something wrong, that sickly sweet smell of death carried on the wind. I'd smelled plenty of kills before, but this was different. Fresher, closer, over here. Tom called out, his voice tight with tension. We converged on his position, and that's when we saw it. The bull elk lay in a small clearing, or what was left of him. He'd been a magnificent animal, probably 600 pounds with a full rack of antlers. But now, I'd seen hundreds of predator kills in my career, but nothing like this. The carcass wasn't just eaten, it was torn apart. Literally ripped. Limb from limb. "Jesus Christ," Brad whispered, backing away. No bear did this. He was right. Bears and wolves are messy eaters, but they're efficient. They don't waste meat. This was different. The elk's limbs were scattered across 15 yards of ground. Its massive rib cage had been split open like someone had peeled it apart. The spine was snapped in multiple places. "Look at the antlers," Steve pointed with a shaking hand. The thick base of one antler was completely shattered, with pieces scattered in the snow. It would take immense strength to do that, far beyond what any known predator in these mountains could manage. Mike, who'd been the most skeptical throughout, finally lost his composure. We need to get out of here. Now, right now. Hold on, I said, trying to maintain some control of the situation. Let's think this through. Think what through? Mike's voice rose sharply. That thing we saw on the ridge did this. You know it. Did. No normal animal could. Keep your voice down, I hissed, but the damage was done. Panic was spreading through the group like wildfire. I'm with Mike, Brad said. We pack up camp and get out while we can. This isn't about hunting anymore, Steve nodded vigorously. Whatever did this is still around. Has to be, given how fresh that kill is. They were right about that part. The blood hadn't fully frozen yet, despite the cold. This kill was just hours old. Looking at the scattered remains, I couldn't help but notice there were no clear tracks around the carcass, just broken vegetation and disturbed earth, as if something massive had deliberately obscured its prints. Okay, I said finally, knowing I was losing what little authority I had left. We'll head back to camp. Pack up, but we do it calmly and organized. No running, no splitting up. The men nodded, but I could see the fear in their eyes. We'd crossed some invisible line. The forest around us felt like it was closing in, and every shadow held the potential for something we weren't prepared to face. The walk back to camp was going to be the longest quarter-mile of our lives. That night, none of us slept. We huddled in our tents, listening to the escalating chaos around us. It started around 11:30 with what sounded like rocks being struck together, not the random clatter of falling stones, but deliberate, rhythmic clacking that echoed across the valley. 2 strikes, then 3, then 2 again. The sound seemed to come from multiple directions, as if we were being surrounded. What the hell is that? Tom whispered from his tent. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because right then, something else joined. The percussion, a sound that made my blood run cold. It started as a low rumble, building into a roar that no human throat could produce. The pitch was too deep, too powerful. It resonated in my chest cavity like standing next to a bass speaker. But this was no electronic sound. This was primal, ancient. Mike started praying in his tent. I heard Steve fumbling with his rifle, the metallic click of a round being chambered. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. We don't want any accidents. The roaring stopped abruptly, leaving us in suffocating silence. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate movements circling our camp. The ground trembled slightly with each impact. Whatever was out there was massive. Brad's tent suddenly collapsed with a whoosh of canvas and poles. He screamed, a sharp, terrified sound that cut through the night. Something had brushed against the side of his shelter, not aggressively, but with enough force to snap the aluminum poles like twigs. Get over here, I shouted to Brad, unzipping my tent. He scrambled across the space between us and dove inside, shaking uncontrollably. Did you see it? I asked. Just a shadow, but big, so big. The activity around camp continued for hours. More rock clacking, more of those ungodly roars, and the constant sense of being watched. The temperature dropped below freezing, but none of us dared light a fire. We just sat there, gripping our useless weapons, waiting for dawn, when the first gray light finally crept over the ridgeline. The decision was unanimous. No one had to say it out loud. We were leaving. The hunters, who'd paid thousands of dollars for this trip, didn't even mention their money. They just wanted out. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief as we packed up camp, though I tried not to show it. But that relief was tempered by a new worry, the route home. We had to cover 6 miles of rough terrain to reach the trailhead, and whatever was out there knew these mountains better than we did. Stay close, I instructed as we shouldered our packs. No spreading out, no matter what. We move as a group. The men nodded, their faces haggard from the sleepless night. Even Mike, the previous skeptic, had nothing smart to say. The events of the night had stripped away all pretense of disbelief. We started down the trail just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was silent again, but now we understood that silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. The descent began in tense silence. Our boots crunched through patches of old snow as we followed the switchbacks down into the narrow canyon. I took point, with the others bunched close behind me, their breath forming quick clouds in the cold morning air. The trail wasn't particularly technical, but fear made every step deliberate. About an hour in, the weather started turning. Light snow began falling, not the heavy kind that accumulates quickly, but those small, wind-driven flakes that sting your face and reduce visibility. The temperature couldn't have been more than 25 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind whistling through the canyon didn't help. "Watch your footing," I called back. "Trail's getting slick." We'd covered maybe 2 miles when Steve grabbed my shoulder. "Hold up," he whispered, pointing to our right, where the canyon wall sloped down to meet the trail. There, perfectly preserved in a patch of fresh snow, was a track that made my stomach clench. It was similar to what we'd seen days earlier, but this one was fresh, couldn't have been more than 30 minutes old. The print was enormous, easily 16 inches long, with 5 distinct toe impressions. What struck me most wasn't just its size, but its depth. Whatever made it had to weigh hundreds of pounds to sink that deep into the packed snow. "It's following us," Brad muttered, his voice barely audible above the wind, paralleling our route. He was right. As we continued down the trail, we spotted more tracks wherever the snow had accumulated enough to hold impressions. They would appear on the slopes above us, disappear for a while, then show up again. The creature was using the terrain to its advantage, staying just out of sight while keeping pace with our group. Tom, who'd been quiet most of the morning, spoke up. "Why isn't it just attacking? What's it waiting for?" "Keep moving," I said, not wanting to dwell on his questions. "We stay together, keep our pace steady. No running." The snow intensified slightly, reducing visibility to about 50 yards. The tracks continued to shadow us, sometimes appearing closer to the trail, other times higher up the canyon wall. The pattern was deliberate, methodical. This wasn't just an animal following potential prey. There was intelligence behind these movements. Mike, who'd been bringing up the rear, suddenly stopped. "Listen," he hissed. We all froze. Through the whisper of falling snow came the sound of rocks sliding somewhere above us. Not a natural tumble, but the careful movement of something large, trying to move quietly and not quite succeeding. "It's still there," Brad whispered, gripping his rifle tighter. 4 more miles, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "We keep moving. Whatever happens, we don't separate." The men nodded, their faces tight with fear. We resumed our careful descent, all too aware of our vulnerability. In this narrow canyon, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere up in the white haze, something continued to shadow our every move. The canyon narrowed ahead of us, funneling into a natural bottleneck where the walls pinched together. The falling snow had eased slightly, but an unnatural quiet descended, that absolute silence that makes your ears strain for any sound. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, as if the very air was holding its breath. I held up my hand, signaling the group to pause. Something felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and 25 years of wilderness experience screamed at me that we were being watched. The others must have felt it too. No one made a sound. That's when it happened. From the tree line above the bottleneck, movement caught my eye. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. A figure emerged from between 2 towering pines, and as it straightened to its full height, I felt my reality shatter. The creature stood at least 19 feet tall, nearly 3 times the height of a man. Its massive frame blocked out the diffused light from the clouded sky, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch forever across the snow. "Dear God," Someone whispered behind me. The being took a single step forward, and I felt the impact through my boots. The ground literally trembled. Its movement was deliberate, almost graceful despite its enormous size. Dark hair covered its body, matted with snow and ice. But it was the face that froze me in place, deeply set eyes that held an intelligence that was undeniably present, undeniably aware. The spell broke when Brad screamed. Raw, primal panic erupted through our group. The careful formation we'd maintained shattered as men broke in different directions. Tom bolted back up the trail, while Mike and Steve scrambled toward a cluster of boulders. Brad just stood there frozen, his rifle hanging uselessly at his side. "Stay together," I shouted, but my voice was lost in the chaos. The creature hadn't moved again, but its presence was overwhelming, commanding the entire canyon. I could smell it now, a powerful, musky odor that cut through the clean mountain air. Another step, and this time small rocks and debris cascaded down the canyon wall from the impact. The sound snapped Brad out of his paralysis, and he took off running toward a stand of trees, separating himself from the group, despite my desperate calls to stay close. The thing's head turned, tracking our scattered movements with terrible precision. Its breath came out in huge clouds of steam in the cold air, and I could hear a deep rumbling sound emanating from its chest. Not quite a growl, but something more complex, more purposeful. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my eyes on both the creature and my scattered clients. The snow was falling harder now, creating an otherworldly scene as this impossible being stood silhouetted against the white sky, watching us with what I could only describe as calculated interest. Our carefully maintained group cohesion had completely dissolved. 5 grown men, experienced hunters all, reduced to panic-driven flight in the face of something that shouldn't exist. Something that was now between us and our way out. Everything dissolved into chaos. Brad's pack hit the ground first, followed by Mike's rifle clattering against rocks. The sound of gear being abandoned mixed with panicked breathing and the crunch of desperate footfalls in the snow. "Keep moving, downhill. Stay together," I shouted, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. But fear had taken hold, turning experienced hunters into terrified prey. My ankle. Steve's cry cut through the pandemonium. He'd caught his boot between 2 rocks in his hurried retreat, twisting hard to the left. I reached him just as he started to fall, grabbing his arm to keep him upright. "Leave the gear," I ordered as Tom tried to retrieve his dropped backpack. "Move now." The urgency in my voice sparked something primitive in them, the need to flee overriding everything else. Behind us, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the canyon. The crack of breaking branches wasn't the normal sound of falling timber or wind damage. These were deliberate breaks, methodical, keeping pace with our retreat. Each snap sounded like a small tree being torn apart, and the intervals between them matched the rhythm of massive footfalls. I kept Steve moving, supporting his weight as he hobbled downhill. His face was twisted in pain, but fear pushed him forward. The others spread out ahead of us, slipping on the snow-covered ground in their haste to put distance between themselves and whatever was following. "Don't look back," I commanded when Brad started to turn his head. "Just keep moving." The sound of our labored breathing mixed with the continued destruction behind us. The thing was paralleling our descent, staying just out of sight in the thick timber, but making its presence known with each earth-shaking step. More gear littered the trail, a scattered first aid kit, someone's camera, a water bottle rolling down the slope. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was distance. Distance from that 19-foot nightmare that had emerged from the trees like something from humanity's darkest prehistoric memories. The breaking branches grew louder, closer. I could smell that musky odor again, stronger now, carried on the wind with the falling snow. Steve stumbled again, and I nearly went down with him. The others were getting too far ahead, splitting up in their panic. "Group up," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Stay in sight of each other." But they were beyond listening, beyond anything except the primal need to escape. Another massive crack split the air, this one so close it made Brad yelp in terror as he ran. The snow was falling harder now, reducing visibility and making the descent even more treacherous. Steve's breathing came in pained gasps as we struggled down the slope. The others were just shapes ahead of us, dark smudges in the whiteness, moving fast and erratic through the trees. Behind us, something huge moved through the forest. Its presence felt more than seen. The impacts of its steps vibrated through the ground, up through my boots, each one a reminder that we weren't alone in this desperate flight down the mountain. We finally reached the trailhead as dusk was settling in, our group scattered and shell-shocked. Steve collapsed onto a fallen log, his ankle swollen to twice its normal size. The others stood in small clusters, still breathing hard, jumping at every sound from the forest behind us. With shaking hands, I pulled out my satellite phone and called the Forest Service dispatch. "This is Marcus Wheeler, licensed guide out of Hamilton. We need immediate assistance at the Bear Creek trailhead. We've had an incident." I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "We've evacuated our hunting camp after encountering something unusual." 2 Forest Service rangers arrived within 45 minutes, their green patrol truck crunching over the gravel. The senior ranger, Peterson, took one look at our disheveled group and the scattered gear we'd managed to carry out, and I could already see the skepticism settling onto his face. "Bear encounter?" he asked, pulling out his notepad. His tone suggested he'd already decided on his report's conclusion. "No," I said firmly. "This was something else. Something much larger." I described the tracks we'd found, the wood knocks, the structure between the boulders, and finally, the enormous figure that had emerged from the trees. The younger ranger exchanged glances with Peterson, poorly hiding his smirk. Brad stepped forward, still visibly shaken. I saw it clear as day. 19 feet tall at least. No bear stands like that. No bear moves like that. Peterson wrote everything down with mechanical efficiency, his expression neutral, but his body language screaming disbelief. "We'll send a team up tomorrow to recover your abandoned gear," he said. "Standard procedure for bear-related evacuations." "It wasn't a bear," Tom insisted, his voice cracking. "We know what bears look like." "This was," he trailed off, perhaps realizing how futile it was. The rangers took our formal statements one by one. I watched as each hunter's account was met with the same professional detachment, our terror and certainty reduced to dry incident report language. "Possible ursine encounter," Peterson muttered as he wrote. "Low visibility conditions. Stress-induced. Panic response." 3 days later, the gear recovery team reported finding nothing unusual, just our scattered equipment spread across the trail. No tracks, no broken trees, no sign of the structure we'd seen. The snow had continued falling after our escape, covering whatever evidence might have remained. Some of the hunters were angry, especially Brad, who demanded the Forest Service conduct a fuller investigation. Others, like Steve, seemed almost embarrassed now, as if the light of day and official skepticism had made them doubt their own experiences. Tom and Mike simply refused to discuss it at all. I filed my own incident report as required by my guiding license, carefully worded to focus on the facts of our evacuation rather than its cause. Peterson's official report classified it as a bear incident exacerbated by weather conditions and group anxiety. Reading it, you'd never know about the 19-foot shadow that had sent 6 grown men running in terror, or the methodical way it had followed us down that mountain. None of my clients ever spoke publicly about what happened that day. I suppose the official report made it easier to stay quiet. Who wants to be labeled as the hunter who mistook a bear for a 19-foot giant? But I know what we saw, and more importantly, I know what we felt. That primal terror that turned experienced outdoorsmen into panicked prey isn't something you can explain away with group anxiety. My reputation in the guiding community changed after that October. Nothing obvious. I still got bookings, still ran successful hunts, but there were whispers. Other guides would give me odd looks when the conversation turned to strange encounters. In the backcountry, some clients specifically requested me, hoping I'd take them to that spot, while others deliberately avoided booking with me. I became known as the guide who'd seen something. Though most people were careful not to say exactly what, I couldn't let it go. Over the next few years, I made several solo trips back to that drainage. Never during hunting season, I wouldn't risk clients' safety again, but in the quieter months, when the snow was gone and the days were long. Each time I found something. Not always dramatic, but enough to keep me coming back. There were tracks similar to what we'd seen that day, but often partially melted or obscured. Once I found the remains of an elk calf, torn apart in that same distinctive way, not like any predator I knew. And yes, I heard the wood knocks. Always distant, always in pairs, echoing across the valley at dusk or dawn. I never saw the figure again, but I felt watched. The forest would go silent, that same unnatural quiet we'd experienced during the hunt, and the hair on my neck would rise. I've mapped these incidents, marking locations of tracks, structures, and sounds. There's a pattern there, but it's not one I fully understand. The activity seems to shift with the seasons, following game movements, but also responding to human presence. It's territorial, yes, but with an intelligence that makes me uncomfortable. The hardest part to reconcile is how the creature, whatever it was, handled us that day. It had every opportunity to attack. We were scattered, panicked, vulnerable. Instead, it herded us out, using its presence and sound to drive us down the trail. Was it defending its territory? Giving us a warning? Or was it something else? A test, perhaps, or a message meant for others like it. I've spent decades in these mountains. I've faced down grizzlies, weathered freak storms, and helped lost hunters find their way home. None of that prepared me for what we encountered. The scientific part of my mind still struggles to accept the impossible scale of what we saw. 19 feet tall, it doesn't make sense. But I know what I saw. I know what 6 other grown men saw, and I know that the official explanation doesn't begin to cover it. These days, when I take clients into the backcountry, I pay more attention to the silence. Most people think wilderness should be full of sound, birds, insects, wind in the trees. But old-timers know better. When the forest goes quiet, it usually means something is watching. Most times, it's a mountain lion or a bear. But sometimes it's something else. I've found more signs over the years. Twisted trees, crude shelters, areas where nothing seems to grow. The pattern extends beyond that one drainage, suggesting something that moves, thinks, and plans. I've learned to read these signs, to know when I'm getting too close to whatever territory they're marking. The Forest Service still has that incident classified as a bear encounter. The gear recovery team's report is filed away somewhere, probably gathering dust. But every now and then, I hear stories from other guides, hunters, or backcountry rangers. They don't usually share them widely, but over a campfire or a quiet drink, they'll talk about similar experiences, the silence, the tracks, the feeling of being watched by something that doesn't quite fit into our understanding of what's possible. I still guide in those mountains. I have to. It's my livelihood, my calling. But I'm more cautious now, more aware. When the forest goes quiet, when that feeling of being watched creeps in, I don't push forward anymore. Some territories aren't meant for us. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. And sometimes, the warning is the kindest outcome you can hope for. If this story lingered with you, like, comment, and subscribe. I'll return tomorrow with more stories.